If only the pioneers who conquered these lands with their blood and sweat and toil could have known that a few hundred years hence, their descendants would be groveling before these Indian tribes and whispering to them, "Thank you for allowing us to live, laugh, and love and do yoga here." Our ancestors probably would have just turned around and went home and said it's not worth the effort. So a writer by the name of Michelle Saika highlights what she says is the worst land acknowledgement she's ever seen. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with this cutting-edge innovation in the field of white guilt, a land acknowledgement is something like an act of contrition that a Catholic might say after confessing his sins to the priest. Except in this case, the act of contrition is being offered to some randomly selected group of Indians who lived on the land in question at some arbitrary point in the past. Land acknowledgements are meant to acknowledge that we are allegedly on tribal land. So needless to say, talking about the worst land acknowledgement, it's like discussing the most unpleasant porta potty you've ever been in. I mean, there aren't any good ones. They're just varying degrees of sickening. The one presented here for consideration is from Vancouver Island University, and it says, Vancouver Island University acknowledges that we are on the traditional and unceded territory of the Snoony Muxu. Well, how do you do that? That's XW. How do you pronounce that? Anyway, territory of the Snoony Muxu people, and we thank them for allowing us to live, laugh, love, and learn here. Okay, I take it back. That is probably the worst. If only the pioneers who conquered these lands with their blood and sweat and toil could have known that a few hundred years hence, their descendants would be groveling before these Indian tribes and whispering to them, "Thank you for allowing us to live, laugh, and love, and do yoga here." Our ancestors probably would have just turned around and went home and said it's not worth the effort. Why bother bleeding and dying for a civilization that will one day be inherited by the most embarrassing, obsequious, effeminate weaklings to ever live on planet Earth? Perhaps that's the point of all of this. The left is punishing their ancestors by becoming everything their ancestors would hate. In fact, come to think of it, that is exactly the point. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Michelle provides another fun contender for the worst land acknowledgement, this one from the Washington State Department of Corrections. It reads, the Washington State Department of Corrections acknowledges that its facilities, offices, and operations are on the ancestral lands and customary territories of indigenous peoples, tribes, and nations. Corrections gives thanks to the tribes for caring for these lands since time immemorial and honors its ongoing connection to these communities, past, present, and future. We welcome the opportunity to collaborate with the indigenous populations and communities and strive to work with our tribal partners to improve the lives of indigenous people and non-indigenous neighbors throughout the state. Okay, you're a prison, so just calm down here. But these acknowledgements also come in video form, lucky for you. For instance, last week, the Aspen Ideas Festival kicked off with this quirky little disclaimer. Listen to this.
Truth and acknowledgement are the foundation to healing and transformation. We begin this effort today by acknowledging that we are in the ancestral lands of Native nations, including the Taino, the Calusa, the Tequesta, and today, the sovereign and unceded homelands of the Seminole Tribe of Florida and the Miccosukee Tribe of Indians of Florida. Our communities and ways have existed long before the United States. We have survived attempted takeovers, the Indian Removal Act under Andrew Jackson, 3 Seminole Wars between 1814 and 1858, being hunted with bloodhounds, rounded up like cattle, and forced on the Trail of Tears.
Okay, the Trail of Tears started in 1830. So that's nearly 200 years ago. My ancestors were dying in the potato famine around that time, but you don't hear me complaining about it. If you're carrying around grievances that date back 2 centuries to a time before you or your parents or your parents' parents or your parents' parents' parents, grandparents' parents were alive, then that tells me that you have these grievances because you want them. They're an emotional tool that you like to use. Here's the thing. Most human beings on Earth today, if they trace their lineage back 200 years, will find that their ancestors endured all manner of unspeakable horrors, deprivations, and sufferings. But only some of us go around talking about it all the time. Only some of us feel that our ancestors' struggles must be acknowledged to us as if we were the ones who suffered those things. But that wasn't even as bad as the acknowledgement that now, as of last year, is played before every home game for the Chicago Blackhawks hockey team. Listen to this.
The Chicago Blackhawks acknowledge that the team, its foundation, and the spaces we maintain, work, and compete within stand upon the traditional homelands of the Miami, Sauk, Meskwaki, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, and the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations. We understand that this land holds immense significance for its original stewards, the native nations, and the peoples of this region. We would also like to recognize that our team's namesake, Sauk War Leader Blackhawk, serves as a continuous reminder of our responsibility to the Native American communities we live amongst and draw inspiration from.
Yes, it's very important that we pay homage to the Ho-Chunk people before a hockey game. I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting down to watch a sporting event and thought to myself, it's not fair that we're all enjoying ourselves here and just completely ignoring the Ho-Chunks. It's just, I've said it so many times, like it's my family, they're sick of me saying because I always say it. They also, of course, had to pay deference to Sauk war leader Blackhawk, who was an Indian warlord born in the mid-1700s. It'd be quite rude to have a hockey match without mentioning an Indian warlord from 250 years ago, obviously. As a war leader, Blackhawk would have led raiding parties. Now, do you know what raiding parties did? They weren't throwing parties as we think of them today. I can tell you that. Okay, these weren't birthday parties. They were raiding parties. And raiding meant stealing from and terrorizing other tribes, often killing their men, kidnapping and raping their women and their children. Okay, that's what Indian tribes did. So when you hear about an Indian warlord, that's what he did. This is how they lived. And of course, we're obsessed with problematic. We got to sift through the lives of all the historical figures, tear down the statues. We're worried about problematic historical figures. But the only historical figures we're still allowed to honor are Indian warlords from 200 years ago that raped and killed children. This is what happened in Indian tribes. It was the case everywhere without exception. They stole from each other, they killed, they kidnapped, they conquered, and so on, over and over again, century upon century. This is one of the many reasons why this whole land acknowledgement thing is ludicrous. Whose land is it? Who are we supposed to be acknowledging? Just the most recent tribe to occupy it before white people showed up? But that tribe stole it from another, and that one from a different tribe, and on, stretching back into the unknown and unrecorded past. This is not whataboutism. This is, first of all, a simple historical reality that needs to be acknowledged. Speaking of acknowledgements, it's also a logical problem for the white guilt brigade. If this is not really our land, if we occupy it illegitimately because we conquered it, then the same must be said of whatever tribe we took it from and of whatever tribe they took it from, etc. The only way to escape this problem is to suggest that the white man should be held to a higher standard. But why is that? The only way to justify a higher moral standard for the white man is to claim that the white man is inherently morally superior. But I'm pretty sure that's not what they mean to say or what they want us to take away from this. Which means then that the same historical standard applies to everybody, which completely destroys the basis for all of this groveling and apologizing. This land was soaked in the blood of conquest long before anyone with white skin ever stepped foot on these shores. The white man joined the fray, joined the fight, didn't start it, or least of all, invent the whole concept. After all, what does the word indigenous even mean? According to the Collins Dictionary, it means, quote, people or things that belong to the country in which they are found rather than coming there or being brought there from another country. Okay, well, that means that either no one is indigenous here or we all are. Because everybody who lives here now, no exceptions here, everyone who lives in the Americas is descended from a group that came here at some point in the past. Period. Now, your ancestors may have come here 1,000 years ago. They may have come here 200 years ago, 2 years ago. But we all came here. A nation of immigrants. Isn't that what the left always likes to say? Now, it's not actually true because the European settlers came here before it was an actual nation. I mean, they came when it was unsettled wilderness, which means they weren't technically immigrants. But we did all come here. That's true. That doesn't mean that we can't or shouldn't defend and control our borders. No, because once you claim and settle a territory, you have to defend it. If you won't or you can't, it will cease to exist. If you have land that you won't or can't defend, you will not have it for very long. That's the law of history. That's the way of the world. The Indian tribes played this same game and understood the rules. It's only we modern people who are stupid and shallow enough to be scandalized by it. By the way, that land acknowledgement from the university has now necessitated its own acknowledgement of the sins committed by the acknowledgement. Because the university posted after that, they said, "We thank Michelle Syka for bringing to our attention an unofficial land acknowledgement on our website. We apologize to those who were negatively impacted by this language." Apologizing for an apology. And if anybody was negatively impacted by the apology for the apology, they'll no doubt apologize for the apology for the apology. They are stuck now in a self-perpetuating cycle of groveling, a vortex of cringe. This is the inevitable end result. It's where it always leads. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with all your friends.